Battery in and then try switching over to it?
To Hollywood, where I attended Hollywood High School.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in Hollywood, with the Hollywood High School experience, that my wife and I became acquainted. We were childhood sweethearts in school days.
Did you meet Sally at Hollywood High School?
Yes, in Hollywood. And we ran in a high school crowd there to football games and beach parties and those fun times that kids have in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Sally and I knew each other there in those days. And
how about your continuing education, Nick? You went, I believe, to Stanford University and also to Harvard.
yes, I did.
What happened there?
Well, I just took a combination of law and economics at Stanford, and entered the Harvard Graduate School of Business Administration when I was young, and it was young too. And I confess I'm a Harvard dropout. I didn't stay with the Harvard Business School experience. Came back to Hollywood and went into business for myself.
What kind of business?
Real estate. And that's been my life experience mostly.
When did you first come to Palm Springs?
Came in 1916, I believe, or 15, the year of the San Francisco World's Fair. We came from St. Louis to visit relatives in California, and we visited the San Francisco World's Fair, which was called the Panama Pacific Exposition, commemorating the opening at that time of the Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm.
There was at the same time a kind of a rival World's Fair in San Diego, which we also attended. And during that visit, that Pacific Coast visit, we visited Palm Springs as tourists. And I was about 10 years old, and my recollection of Palm Springs is rather hazy of that 1915 or 16 area.
Do you remember anything at all about the place?
I'm sorry,
or how you got here?
I'm reasonably sure that we drove over rather difficult roads, as they were in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And there were no freeways, of course, no highways in any real sense of the word. And I think we stayed at a tent hotel on Palm Canyon Drive. That might have been the Desert Inn. What was it called before it was called the Desert Inn? I forget, but I think it might have been operated by Nellie Kaufman as a forerunner of the Desert Inn.
I see.
It was definitely a tent house motel sort of a situation.
You became a frequent visitor to Palm Springs later on.
Yes, in the 20s, my wife Sally, my future wife Sally, and I visited here a lot because her father was a pioneer here. P.T. Stevens was a pioneer developer of Palm Springs, both land and water, and he had a home here, right about here where we're talking, a little in the back, and a little farther away from Palm Canyon Drive, was his home here, and that became our home. And we visited here in the 20s, and then we lived here. We moved in here to live in 1930, and so I remember what there was of Palm Springs in those days. It was still a small town.
Sally must have been a powerful attraction to make you want to come down here and go into business here.
Well, we had a lot going together, really, and I'm sure that we didn't foresee that we would eventually become engaged and get married. But actually, we knew each other in high school, and And after high school, we were away at college. She had hers in Pomona College and I in Stanford. And she then went on to Smith College. She transferred from Pomona to Smith. And one fine day, I telephoned her from Hollywood to Northampton, Massachusetts, Smith College, and asked her to marry me. And she said, in a moment of confusion, she accepted. She announced that she accepted my proposal. So that's how that's how our engagement began. We had about a 3-year engagement, quite unusual in these times.
That's true. Where did you live when you came to Palm Springs then, with Sally as your bride?
Right in back here, right here. There weren't any addresses. This was, I guess, it was called Palm Canyon Drive, all right. That was the name of it. But there were no numbers. We didn't have street numbers until after the city incorporated in 1938. But you could say that based on these numbers, we lived at 899 North Palm Canyon Drive. And
we're very close to it.
Yes, right back in there. You can almost see it from here. The house is still here, and it belongs to the St. Paul's in the Desert Episcopal Church. Mm-hmm. It's the rectory and serves office and other functions for the church.
What was the rest of the town like in 1930?
Well, gosh, there wasn't any rest of the town hardly yet. There was one street really, Palm Canyon Drive. Indian Avenue was a dirt trail, unpaved, and Palm Canyon Drive had an asphalt paving, asphalt surface. It was strictly two-way. I mean, one lane each direction. And this time of the year, in the summer, we used to say you could roll a bowling ball down Palm Canyon Drive and never hit anybody or anything.
I'm sure that's true. How did you keep cool in the summer in those days?
Well, I suppose we got used to it a lot, and we always tried to stay at least. We tried to get away in the worst time of the summer, over to the beach or up in the mountains, and we tried to stay always. I consider the point of honor in those days to stay until Bastille Day, the 14th of July, just because it was a convenient date. Not that it meant, the holiday meant anything in particular in Palm Springs, but it was just my aim to be able to tolerate the heat and kind of convince my family to enjoy it until that time. Then we'd go to the beach or the mountains.
Culver, in your own social relationship with Sally, through the Stevens family, and of course your own business activities, who were some of the people that you remember best from those days as being close associates?
Oh, of course, my own age group, I suppose, mainly. Harold Hicks and I were very good friends, and there was Rufus Chapman, and the other Chapman, the first name I forget now, not related to Rufus, but the other one was a nephew of Hope Garlick and Isabel Garlick, who owned the Oasis Hotel. And I remember the Garlicks very well, and Alba Hicks, Harold's father, and Alby's mother, Teresa Hicks, and Alby's brother, Milt Hicks, and I don't mean Alby, I mean Harold's brother, Milt Hicks. And there were not very many people of our age group, and we tended to move together occasionally. And we took a great deal of pride in the spirit and the appearance of Palm Springs. We felt that we were sort of the carriers of that spirit, even at a young age. I mean, we kind of had that sense, and so we got together as real estate brokers, Harold and I, and Rufus Chapman.
Had you opened your own office then?
I had my office, yes. my office was almost right here, almost here, just 3 doors to the south of here. Harold's office was the next building, a little farther south where the Hicks Center now is. And he had his office on Palm Canyon Drive. And if you had your office on Palm Canyon Drive, you placed it practically on the paved roadway so that people couldn't miss you.
Well, I was going to ask you, here were you and Harold Hicks and all these other people as realtors.
Yeah.
Who did you sell real estate to?
Very few people. There weren't so many buyers, and there were long dry periods when there were none at all. And of course, we had a depression, a national depression, a world depression in those years too. And so we just had to catch them where we could catch them. And Harold's real estate office, Harold Hicks, was right here, 3 or 4 doors south of here, and it's presently Hicks Center. But his little old real estate office was a nice little single office building, and he conducted his real estate from there. And I came along, and I built mine this side of his, of course, because I owned this property. And so I built mine and here on this property. So I was only a quarter of a block ahead of him on Palm Canyon Drive. So the people would slow down a little bit seeing my sign, and then by the time they got stopped, they'd be in front of his office. So he benefited. But it was good to attract their attention. We didn't. It was fine. Just so one of us got the customer, see. And my office was on an angle, so that it faced into the oncoming traffic coming down Palm Canyon Drive from the north and from the west, from Los Angeles. And most of our customers came from there, from Los Angeles and Hollywood and Pasadena. And so that was the way we operated. And but we got together. We felt more useful in cooperation rather than in competition.
Sure. Nick, I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. We're going to stop for just a second here, and we want to put a battery in, and then wait a minute, not ready yet.
All right, let me know.
We're back now with Culver Nichols to continue our conversation about some of his earliest experiences here in the desert. Culver, you were telling us about your real estate office and the state of business in those days here in the community.
We all had a pride in Palm Springs, and we all took pride in the condition and the well-being of our community and the appearance of it. And especially in the matter of signs, there was a tendency, because there was this little depression on, for sale signs to sort of pop up around various properties. And both Harold and I had our own subdivisions. We both subdivided property and had our own tracts. And we decided that it would be very unsightly to have a whole bunch of for sale or for rent signs, other signs even, blossoming all over town, particularly in our new subdivisions, so that we agreed to limit signs and actually to not use them. Mm-hmm. And the few other real estate brokers who were here joined with Harold and me in that effort, so that we would keep Palm Springs free of signs. Now remember, it was just a little desert village. It wasn't a city. Hadn't been incorporated. There was no government here at all, and so it had to be just a volunteer local effort on our part. And we did it, and we maintained it almost fiercely, because if we would see a sign that we didn't approve of, we would just simply eliminate it. And actually, we did a little of that. We were young fellows, and we liked to get out in the night when it was a little cooler, and we do a little night riding on the sign riding circuit.
Where were the first subdivisions that you developed, Nick?
Here in the north, on the north part of Palm Springs, which was considered north in those days, Palm Springs Estates, El Mirador Estates, El Mirador Park, and several others. And Harold had Las Palmas Estates and Merida Vista and one or two others. And so we had pretty much the developed area under our wing. And
were there any particularly exciting or interesting people that you sold to that you remember?
Well, yes, but I guess I don't remember very much about them. No, I don't.
There must have been some kind of exciting ones from time to time.
I don't think so.
When you came to Palm Springs as Sally Stevens' husband and the son-in-law of P.T. Stevens, I would think you had to get a little involved, at least, in the Stevens affairs.
Oh, yeah, sure. And Stevens was a rugged individual. He was a real pioneer, P.T. Stevens. And it was, it took a little sort of getting acquainted and getting to know each other for him to accept his son-in-law, because his daughter was the apple of his eye, and so we had our differences, which we reconciled, but we had lots of fine times too, and he enjoyed showing me the work that he was doing, still doing at the age of 84. Developing, well, the El Mirador Hotel was one of his developments.
Was that fully completed when you came?
Yes, it was completed before we were married, and we attended the opening celebration there on New Year's Eve, 1928, I believe. Mm-hmm. I think it was 28, or that it opened with a New Year's Eve celebration. And we had a real ball there. Warren Penny was the head of it, and such people as Tony Burke were there in public relations and publicity, and Frank Bogart, and it was really a great event and a great place.
It was an exciting time.
And P.T. got a little publicity from that sort of thing. He built the golf course for it. He built the El Mirador golf course.
Culver, I heard that a black person was involved in the construction of that golf course. Is that true?
A very fine black man, Lawrence Crossley, who deserves to be recognized as one of the true pioneers here in Palm Springs.
Lawrence Crossley.
So Crossley Road is named for him, and he was here from the early 20s and built the El Mirador golf course and for P.T. Stevens, and operated it. And yes, he was really a great man.
Was actually the construction of the course under his direction?
Yes, it was indeed.
And then when it became a reality, he was the operator.
Yes, but it also had a pro operator, Mike Flavin. Mm-hmm. Mike Flavin lived in the clubhouse, which Stevens built for him and his family. And so Mike Flavin was the pro at the golf course, and Lawrence Crossley was the greenskeeper and superintendent and developer.
Where was the course located?
It was at the corner of Tachiva and Caballeros, the present-day names of the streets. And it was at that intersection of Tachiva and Caballeros, the northeast corner.
Northeast corner.
And there were 160 acres for it in there. And it was piped and watered and planted with Bermuda grass fairways and ryegrass greens.
Would this have been
tees.
the first course in Palm Springs?
Yes, it was.
It would have.
Yeah.
That would have predated O'Donnell then.
Yes, it was ahead of O'Donnell, yeah.
How long did that course operate?
That course operated until the depth of the Depression. I would say it was closed in 1932, probably, at the bottom of the Depression. And it was about that time that Sally and I moved into the clubhouse as our home. And we are living there to this day. Excuse me, I am living there to this day.
You're, well, in a sense, the other two.
Yeah.
But you mean that clubhouse? That
there.
clubhouse then was where your home is located now on Paseo El Mirador.
That's my home, and our family home.
And you've lived there since
Sally's
1930.
and mine and our family. We raised our 3 sons there, and we've raised horses and turkeys and alfalfa and tomatoes and squash and everything that you can possibly imagine out there. We had the Nichols Ranch there.
So that how large was the Nichols Ranch? How far did it extend?
Well, it was most of that 160-acre golf course.
I see.
We just simply converted it to the Nichols Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Because the golf course couldn't be operated. You couldn't get enough money to maintain and operate the golf course. Although Stevens tried very hard when he started it. He made arrangements for all the green fees to be given to children's charities. Mostly in Los Angeles, because there weren't any out here at the time. And so the scorecard that he had printed for El Mirador Golf Course recited El Mirador Golf Course, where the poor kids play golf by proxy. That was his quotation.
I like that.
And he was a pretty keen New Englander when it came to thinking up things to do and say in the most succinct way. Yeah. And so that was his motto for the golf course, which he had set up as a charity for children.
Nick, the management and care of the Stevens properties fell naturally into your hands.
Oh, yeah.
Following his death.
Yes.
How extensive were those properties when you came to Palm Springs?
Well, they were quite large. And of course, he took some pleasure in training me to do some of the work, but they were a large part of the north side of Palm Springs, north of Alejo, yes, and east of Palm Canyon Drive.
He also owned quite a bit of property downtown, didn't he?
Not.
Well, I was thinking of the Francis Stevens School.
The Francis Stevens School is just north of Alejo, isn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And yes, that was his, which he donated to the community for the only school that was here at the time.
Now was that the first school, or?
No, it wasn't the first school. The first school was in a rented building on Palm Canyon Drive, a little bit south of that, about, well, not too far from Amado.
I see.
So when Stevens wanted there to be a school and his wife had died, so he wanted, but he did it before her death. He and his wife planned the school together and donated it to the school district, and so he planned it and had it built, and he appeared after his wife's death. He appeared at the dedication ceremony meeting in the school, in the school auditorium, and made a beautiful speech, a short, homey, pioneer P.T. Stevens kind of talk, dedicating that school to his wife and to the children of Palm Springs.
Well, now that was served as the town school for many, many years, didn't it?
Yes, it did indeed.
Would that have been one where Catherine Finchie was an instructor?
Yes, she was a teacher there and superintendent of schools when it was under her wing.
I see.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when the district closed that school, I think they built another school on property that was also part of the Stevens estate. And I'm thinking of Raymond Cree, the junior high.
Oh yes, the Raymond Cree Junior High School is on a portion of that former golf course property, the corner of Vistacino and Caballeros.
Nick, did the Stevens estates or your own property in those days in the early 30s extend up to what I know is one of the dearest places in the world to your heart, and that is the areas up in Chino Canyon?
Oh yes, yes indeed. Sure. Yes, he had Chino Canyon, and our family cherishes it.
Now, why do you love it so much up there?
Well, I suppose it's sentimental because it meant so much to him, and because it's so beautiful and natural, and we've been able to keep it natural and relatively unspoiled.
You have a hot springs up there, I believe.
Yes, we have several. Yeah, and we just love the place, and we're just devoted to the natural environment there, so that we want to keep it natural.
Nick, it wasn't long after you came to Palm Springs that you got into the thick of local affairs. You got involved with the Chamber of Commerce, and you were part of the organizing committee for incorporation.
Yeah.
What were the first real civic responsibilities you undertook?
Oh.
Would it have been with the Chamber, perhaps?
Well, that's before incorporation, really. You see, before there was a city, the Chamber was the nearest thing to a town meeting.
It was kind of your unofficial city council.
It was sort of the unofficial body in charge of the town, and so you had to have an active chamber, and you had to keep in contact with the county officials over in Riverside, because they were the ones who collected our taxes.
Do you remember who the leaders in the chamber were in those days? Who the manager might have been?
Oh, sure. The earliest one that I remember was Frank Shannon. Frank Shannon, for many years, was the secretary manager of the chamber. And we called him Pop Shannon.
No.
And he held the town together just by simply being in that position of being the only representative of the community of Palm Springs to the outside world and internally to ourselves.
Now, were all the people you mentioned earlier pretty much involved in that chamber in those days, Harold Hicks and...
Well, yes and no. The time came in the 20s when the people in the hotel business and also the merchants began to feel the need of promotion, which the chamber wasn't doing. The chamber was just functioning as a meeting place for officials from out of town, from the county seat, for example. If they wanted, somebody in Riverside wanted to know what Palm Springs wanted, or how Palm Springs was thinking, why, they would call up the Chamber of Commerce. But that wasn't serving the needs of promotion that was felt by the hotels, and I mean particularly a group which came to be known as the Big Five hotels. Mm-hmm. And those hotels formed an organization called Palm Springs Associates, and that was done in the mid-20s. And the owners and operators and managers of the Big Five hotels got together and formed this promotional organization and agreed to assess themselves for a promotional purse to promote Palm Springs outside.
You remember what those hotels were?
Sure. They were the Desert Inn, El Mirador, Oasis, Deep Well Ranch, Smoke Tree Ranch. Those were the Big Five.
I see.
And the people, the personalities were, here we go. The personalities, sure. The head of the Desert Inn was Nellie Kaufman, of course. And the El Mirador was managed and operated by Warren Penny. And Oasis was Hove Garlick, and his wife Isabel. That's Garlick, I believe. And the Deep Well Ranch was Frank and Melba Bennett, and owners the Phil Boyds, Phil and Dorothy Boyd. And Smoke Tree Ranch was, yes, I'm so smart. I thought I had them all right at the tip of my tongue.
That would have been before Jacques Cromlin came and got
Yes,
involved,
it was
wouldn't it?
indeed. The owner and operator of Smoke Tree Ranch was an individual, sort of feisty, Irish or Scottish type, and that's no slur,
Well,
because I have both in me.
doesn't matter, but they formed an extremely powerful association then, I suppose.
Yeah,
in the
it
affairs of
was.
the
It
town.
was good and strong, and they kicked in quite a respectable pot, and they advertised nationwide, and they did. They were able to evaluate the results. They had clippings to show what their ads were doing, and they also had the customers who would come and report that that's how they learned about Palm Springs. And so that was a good idea, and it was successful, and it was quite harmonious. It was quite a gathering together by these competitors. These Big Five hotels and guest ranches were really in competition with each other for the customers, and they realized that they had to get them here.
But they understood the importance of cooperation too.
They had to bring them here, and so they were friendly about it.
Nick, did the first moves for incorporation grow out of the Chamber of Commerce? Was it kind of instrumental, or was it a different group to try to incorporate the
I
city?
would say yes. It grew out of this same group as Chamber of Commerce members and influential in the Chamber of Commerce, and recognizing that it was that there was the growth was such, and the recognition of the difficulty of dealing with government as far away as the county seat in Riverside, 50 miles over dubious roads, and so that the local business people felt that need, and particularly the hotel people, and decided that let's get our act together and let's incorporate this as a city. And they made a study of it, and they found out what the advantages and disadvantages might be, and how you did it, how you incorporate it, and so forth. You had a committee, so we had a committee.
You, I believe, were a member of that committee.
I was on the committee, and so was Harold. So were the representatives of the Big Five hotels, and we were all, and the business people from downtown, and we were all on that committee. and we all had that purpose, to incorporate the city of Palm Springs, to give us more local governmental control and a little better control of our tax dollars.
Did you find good support in the community for incorporation, or did you have to go out and do a little bit of a sales job?
We didn't have to sell it a darn bit. It was accepted as a natural.
Who was sort of the leader of that committee? I know Phil Boyd was the first mayor. Was he instrumental in the committee too?
I would say he was active in the committee, but not he didn't take a power role in the committee. No one did really. I don't remember anybody as steering the committee. There was somebody who was chairman, and I can't tell you who it was. There was somebody who was chairman and had the duty to steer the committee. And by golly, I just don't remember who it was.
But the incorporation actually took place in 1938.
1938, and I would say that Frank Shannon, the secretary manager of the Chamber of Commerce, was active in that committee, and was happy to have it take over the many of the functions that the Chamber of Commerce felt burdened with and overloaded with at the time.
I see. Was the first city council a pretty successful situation?
Oh yes, it was fine. It was a great city council. Let's see, was the first mayor Frank Shannon?
I think first mayor was Phil Boyd.
I think he was too. Frank Shannon was on that first council, I think. Pop Shannon, the Chamber of Commerce man. I forget who. I guess Alva Hicks probably was on it. We called him Alvy, but his name was Alva, A-L-V-A-H, Hicks. And I'm sure he was a member of that first city council.
The Hicks family was interesting, Nick, because they were so deeply involved in the development of a water agency here in the desert area.
Right.
Did you get involved in that at all?
Yes. Stevens was into that. I wasn't so in that, but Stevens was the first, owned the first water company, and sold it to Hicks. Mm-hmm. And that was the Palm Valley Water Company,
Palm Valley Water Company.
Which he bought, and it was the only water company here. And he sold it to Alva Hicks, who changed the name of it to the Palm Springs Water Company. Mm-hmm. And from that time on, until it became the Desert Water Agency, it was the Palm Springs Water Company, and it was privately owned by the Hicks family.
Nick, along the way, you developed a little water agency of your own, didn't you?
Well, that was Stevens also. That's the Whitewater Mutual Water Company, of which I...
And it exists to this day, I believe.
Which is still in existence, and I'm still in charge of it. And our source is the Whitewater River, and our water is brought in a main aqueduct from our intake in Whitewater Canyon, which probably is is close. I know it isn't, but it's not too far from the center of this.
I should explain to our viewers, Nick, that today, the 8th day of July in the year 1986, the event of the last 24 hours at 2:20 last night was an earthquake with a reading of 6 on the Richter scale, which shook things up around here pretty well. And if you hear us occasionally during this conversation refer to an earthquake, that's what we're talking about. Everybody's still a little shaky. And the epicenter was, as Nick said, right by the point where you collect your water from the Whitewater River.
Now the latest I've heard is that it was 5 miles upstream from us at the fish hatchery, the Whitewater Fish Hatchery. That has come out on the news and in the Desert Sun, I believe. So that's pretty close. Very close to Palm Springs. And
How long did this water agency exist? Did it go back as early as the Palm Valley Water Company?
Earlier, no, yes, let's see. Well, about as early as, perhaps a little earlier, or not quite as early. I'm vacillating there a little bit. I don't need to, because I can tell you that our company was incorporated in 1927 as the Whitewater Mutual Water Company, and before that time it was unincorporated and not by that name. It didn't have a name, but it was a private project of P.T. Stevens.
Who were the customers? Who did you serve?
Just the shareholders of the company. It's a mutual company, nonprofit organization, and so the people who own the company use the water. And
would they be mostly in the far northern part of the Palm Springs area?
Yes, mostly in this part of Palm Springs and farther north.
I see.
Yes.
But it is, because it's a mutual company, it's not you don't supply water generally.
No, we don't, and it's not drinking water, it's irrigation water.
Oh.
And so that most of our users have another source of water for their household use.
You've been involved in water quite a bit, though. You were a member of the Riverside County Flood Control Commission, and that got you involved in water here in the area.
Yes. We had to form that commission after the flood of '38 shook up the entire county. Riverside County was devastated in 1938 by one of the greatest floods of the century. Mm-hmm. And I was here, of course, and I was in that flood up to my neck. And
you make that sound kind of threatening.
And I should have had better sense, but I was interested in what was happening.
Where did you go to get wet?
I was concerned. Well, I went up to our intake in Whitewater Canyon, and it's a wonder I ever got back to Palm Springs, but somehow I got back to Palm Springs in the flood.
And the Whitewater River was really roaring.
The Whitewater River was all over the place. It was everywhere. And of course, there was not the development here in 1938 that came later, but it ravaged the whole valley all the way to the Salton Sea, through Indio and through every part of the valley, just everywhere. And it was especially heavy up at the source of the Whitewater River, up in Whitewater Canyon. And that's where I got into it, and foolishly, but it came out all right. I guess.
That you got back home all right.
Just lucky, yeah.
Nick, all these years, have you always maintained your real estate brokerage here in Palm Springs?
Yes, until very recently, and I'm still a member of the Realty Board, but I don't now conduct active brokerage. I've discontinued that just recently, so that I'm not doing brokerage business, but maintaining my connections with the board.
Were you involved in the development of any of the extremely well-known parts of Palm Springs in those days? Las Palmas, for example?
Oh, that was Hicks development, and all of that was previously owned by my father-in-law, P.T. Stevens, who sold it to Alva Hicks, who subdivided and developed that area, that whole west side, west of Palm Canyon Drive, and did some very fine developments in there. And some of the homes that he actually built, he not only subdivided the land, but he built homes in there, Alva Hicks, and his son Harold carried on his work. And so many of the fine homes, and I think Harold can tell you more about those than I can, but that was originally P.T. Stevens' land, and Stevens brought the water to it, and particularly the irrigation water from Whitewater, and so that well, we had a farm garden over across the street, right here. I'm looking out across Palm Canyon Drive now, and if it were still here, I could see our fence over there, that was meant to keep the wild horses from ravaging our fruit and vegetables over there. We had a pomegranate orchard in there that was very, very beautiful and very productive.
And what you're doing now is looking right across Palm Canyon Drive here at the corner of El Alameda toward the florist shop that's on the other side of the street. But in those days there was a fence and that kept the horses in.
There was a little fence over there about 5 feet high, and I looked out my office window one fine day, and here was a beautiful bighorn ram just sauntering across Palm Canyon Drive, and he just took 2 or 3 steps and just bounded over that fence like it wasn't there and started munching on the pomegranates. And so I walked out of my office to get a better look at him. Unfortunately, I didn't have a camera, and of course he knew I was following him, so he just took at a leisurely pace, kept on going until he crossed Indian Avenue, and he went right over to Harold Lloyd's house, which was right there at the end of El Alameda. And he went in Harold Lloyd's gate, and I don't know what he found in there. Better than pomegranates, probably.
You had a lot of Hollywood celebrities living very close to this little area right here, didn't you, in those days?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Many of them around that property around the El Mirador?
Yes, quite a few of them, yeah. Charlie Farrell is still over there in his home that he built or it was built for him in 1932, 33, on the corner of Tachiba and Miralesti.
And Eddie Cantor had a home fairly
Eddie Cantor's
close
house was on Miralesti, corner of Miralesti and Mel Avenue. No, Paseo El Mirador.
Paseo El Mirador.
Yeah. And
there must have been a lot of them.
yes.
Nick, when you took a little time out from business, the real estate brokerage and the water company, and your work on the Chamber of Commerce and the Planning Commission and so on, what did you and Sally do for fun? What kind of social life was there?
Yeah. Yes, well.
I know there were a lot of very interesting clubs in those days.
Yeah. There were parties, and there were 1 or 2 restaurants that were the only ones to go to, and you'd go there and have fun. There was the Doll House. The original Doll House was on Palm Canyon Drive.
It would have been almost across the street from you up the
No, that
street
was
a little
the
way.
second Doll House.
Oh, that was the
There,
second
that's
one.
Sorrentino's now.
Well, I didn't know there was one before that.
The original Doll House was on the west side of Palm Canyon Drive at just south of Vallejo, just about in there. And
Now, was that George and Ethel, or was that...
no, that was before George and Ethel Strebe had it. That was 2 sisters, and can't think of their names now, but somebody will remember for you the names of
I'm
those.
sure they will.
The names of those 2 sisters who had that dollhouse in there, and that was a fun place. It was relaxed, and you just sort of went in there and had fairly good food, and you could relax. And
Did you ever visit the places that were so famous for gambling in the old days?
oh, sure. The first
Where were they located?
The first one, the best one, was the Dunes Club. That was on what is now Date Palm, just north of the bridge where Date Palm bridges the Whitewater River.
That would have been about where the Kmart store is now.
Yes, approximately. And it was a very nice nightclub, a very, very nice, almost dignified kind of an atmosphere.
What sorts of games did they offer?
They had roulette and craps, and I don't know. I think that was all that I remember.
No blackjack in those days.
Blackjack, I think they
Blackjack,
had. Yeah, I think they had blackjack, roulette, and craps.
I
And the
understand.
Wertheimer brothers were the men who brought it here and opened it, and they came from, I think, Detroit. I'm not sure.
Detroit or Chicago.
Al and Lou Wertheimer, and they were nice guys. They were good people. They trailed a kind of a reputation of perhaps the underworld with them, so that it was easy enough for some people to sort of badmouth them a little, but nobody really disliked them or felt that they were a bad influence or bad for the community. They had a rule that they would not let local people come in there and gamble, and so it was only with the greatest difficulty that our younger set was able to get in there on the promise that we wouldn't attempt to gamble.
Oh.
But we would come there for the dinner dancing.
Oh.
And the ambience was charming, you know. It was this sort of purple velvet kind of
Yeah.
ambience, and lights were low, candlelight, and fine music. Boy, did they have the little combo, though.
Nick, it's my understanding you had a place right here in town too called the Colony Club. Am I correct about that?
I can't say that. I don't know that.
It used to be at the old Howard Manor?
Well, I don't know that. Now, you know something that I don't know, because
Well,
that wasn't...
I only know by hearsay.
Well, it must have been later than my time. You see, my time was about in the 20s and 30s,
Would there have
before
been,
and after I was married.
Would there have been one in down near Cathedral City,
Sure,
where the
there was
Elks
one.
Club is now?
Sure, there was one in Cathedral City, and that was on Palm Canyon Drive, or just off of it. And that was, what's his name? Do you remember that guy's
I think it
name?
was called the 139 Club.
It was the 139, yes, and there was a guy who was the personality there, whose name is...
His name I don't
We
remember.
thought of it more as his place rather than the 139. I guess we called it the 139. We didn't ever go there because it was just for gambling, and there wasn't this nice little dance floor and this nice little lovely music combo. Ruby, who later opened Ruby's Dunes. Ruby was the violinist in that combo, and was he good? Oh, man. And his wife was the singer, and she was good. And then there was another guy. I can almost see him and hear him, but I can't call his name. But I can almost see and hear the music. It was that good.
How about movies? When did the first movie theater open here?
Oh, the first movie theater was in the schoolhouse, in the Francis Stevens School. The Francis Stevens School was named for my wife's mother. And the first movie was in that auditorium. And Earl Strebe was the projectionist and the operator of the film. And he had films there, I don't know how often, several times a week, he can tell you. So that was the first movie theater.
Well, when did Earl open the first one downtown? Was that his?
That was in his mother-in-law's property, Zaddy Bunker's property.
Would that have been the Village Theater?
In the Village Theater, yes. And
would that have been before the war
huh.
or after?
Gee whiz, I don't know, but he'll tell you.
It's hard to remember, but we'll be talking to him too.
Yeah.
So you did have some things you could do for fun, but there must have been a lot of private parties too.
Yeah, we had private parties, and the racket club opened in the early 30s. Charlie Farrell and Ralph Bellamy felt the lack of adequate tennis courts. They had to at El Mirador to play on the courts. They had to sign up and wait their turn. They didn't like it, so they said, let's have our own tennis courts and our own tennis club. And so Ralph Bellamy and Charlie Farrell opened the racket club in 1930, 33 or 34, 30,
Somewhere along in there.
very early in the 30s. And they had a nice bar and restaurant and dance floor and music and orchestra, and that's where the parties were from then on.
And I'll bet they bought the property from you.
Not directly, no. I sold it to Alva Hicks, who sold it to them.
I see.
And yeah.
How about the tennis club? When did Andy Pearl open the tennis club?
Shortly after, sometime I guess in the 30s. I don't remember that. I can't tell you. I don't know when.
Did that become a part of the social scene too
Yes,
when it opened?
it did. It did. It was. They had the tennis courts, and they had the ambience. They had the place was very photogenic with the oval pool at the foot of the mountain, and underneath a balcony from which you could get very nice shots of the pool there at the foot of the mountain, and so it was quite attractive and quite popular. And it was Andy Pearl's answer to the racket club. There had to be an answer, you see, if you were in competition in Palm Springs in the early days. Sometimes the going was rough. I mean, there weren't enough customers to satisfy one business, let alone two in competition, or three. And so they felt it. The hotels felt it when they were in competition. When El Mirador opened up, it took some customers from the other hotels, and particularly from the Desert Inn. And Melly Kaufman was not happy about that. And so particularly when P.T. Stevens opened up a golf course, calling it El Mirador Golf Course, and it was available to guests of the El Mirador Hotel, but also open to the public so that her guests could go and play golf. Land sakes, of all places in the north side of Palm Springs, away from the Desert Inn, away from the center of town, which was the center. And so there were three areas. There was the center, that was the Desert Inn, and there was the south, and that was Pearl McManus, and there was the north, and that was P.T. Stevens, El Mirador. And never the train shall meet.
There was a little competition, I suppose.
So one fine day, Nellie was very good at promotion. She had that thing of having all of the county supervisors down for meals and guests and that sort of thing, to keep it political with the county seat in Riverside. She also had this thing of promotion through the media. She was, I think, the first to recognize the importance of the promotional story as apart from advertising, paid promotion. Mm-hmm. And so she would invite such people as the representatives of the Auto Club of Southern California, who had a magazine that they published monthly, and those editors would come to visit Palm Springs, and what they saw was the Desert Inn. And so it was with the Los Angeles Times. In those days, there were hardly any columnists. Columnists were almost unknown in the print media, but there were two in the Los Angeles Times, and one who was memorable was Lee Shippey, Shippey-E-Y, Shippey, Lee Shippey, and he had at least a weekly, maybe an oftener than weekly column in the LA Times, and he was sort of Nellie Kaufman's man on the LA Times, and of course he wrote articles about the Desert Inn. Well, one fine day, darned if he didn't appear in print in the LA Times with a beautiful story on P.T. Stevens and El Mirador Hotel and golf course with photos in the LA Times. Well, there was a little explosion in the center of town when that appeared in print. And Nellie Kaufman came up here and accosted P.T. Stevens in his home here, shaking this newsprint out in front of his nose. What does this mean? Well, of course, he had given Lee Shippey a tour of the golf course and given a little bit of his homespun wisdom along with it. And so they had a few words about it, mostly Nellie's words. And she ended up by saying, P.T., I'll have you know that God Almighty built Palm Springs. And with that, she stalked out of his house. And so there was, that was, I'm afraid, was a little bit parting of the ways there. But it was a wound that was easily healed. It didn't last, and they remained good friends.
Nick and the P.T. Stevens ran into a lot of problems, didn't they, with the El Mirador, though, toward the time it closed. What happened there, and what happened with him?
Yeah. There was, business was very poor, and his attorney, Warren Penny, took over for the hotel owners, an operation of it during the Depression. And things went from bad to worse. There was more and more of a depression in the land, and less visitors to Palm Springs, fewer and fewer. And there was this falling off of income for all the hotels, and El Mirador suffered like the rest. So the time came when it couldn't meet the payments on its bond issue. There was a first mortgage bond out on El Mirador Hotel in the amount of about $150,000. Doesn't seem like much today. And the holder of the bond issue was a San Diego investor named Lacoe, L-A-C-O-E. And he finally decided he'd have to foreclose on his bond and take over the ownership of the hotel. But last thing he wanted was the management of a hotel in Palm Springs that was losing money. And so Warren Penny became his attorney for the foreclosure of the bond issue. And Warren Penny was the manager and operator of the hotel for the stockholders of the hotel. PT was the biggest stockholder, and others were Hicks and Coker, and Lawrence Crossley had stock in it. Other people around town had stock in the hotel, but it had to be foreclosed to wipe out some other obligations, I guess.
That must have been a bitter pill for P.T. Stevens.
It was difficult. Yeah, it was tough, and but he took it as inevitable, and so the hotel ended up owned by Lecoq, whose managing operator was his attorney, Warren Penny, who had been PT's attorney for the formation of the hotel. And so it was a natural and logical development. And the Depression being what it was, there wasn't any use wasting any tears on that matter. There wasn't the emotional involvement in the ownership of the hotel that we've had in connection with, for instance, with the golf course and our golf course home. So we didn't cry over that.
How much longer did P.T. Stevens live then?
He died, by golly, he died in that same year, 1932.
Was that here in town?
Yes, he died here at his home, which I've already indicated is right here in back of us.
It was very close. Nick, what was Sally doing during all these years when you were so busy with these other affairs?
Well, she was busy. She and I had other interests. We had social interests. We had school friends and other friends, and we kept up with them. And we were together were very much interested in what everybody's looking for. What is the meaning of life? What are we here for? And these were the sorts of questions that motivated a lot of our activities. We became interested in Gerald Hurd. We became interested in a monastery that he founded over in Trabuco Canyon, over in Orange County, which later he gave to the people that have the Hindu movement with a monastery up at Pacific Palisades and other ashrams around the world and in California. And before it went into that, we became interested in that, and I was on the board of trustees for that monastery, which was intended to be a modern mind-seeking kind of monastic experience under the direction of an English philosopher, Gerald Hurd, who was well known in the 20s and 30s, and is less well known today because, of course, he's dead and gone. But people like Aldous Huxley were interested in what they were there, and also on the board of directors. And so we were interested in things like that. And there was a place up in here in the San Bernardino Mountains above Beaumont at Oak Glen that we were interested in, called the Pines. And that was a a place where you were also seeking meaning, and in a Christian sense, where we studied the four Gospels as offering meaningful material for living and understanding life. And
I think
but from that we found eventually we found C.G. Jung, and became intensely interested in his work and in him personally.
that occupied a great deal of your time, and I know a lot of Sally's time.
Yeah, Sally and I were very active in that sort of thing. Here in Palm Springs, we even went so far as to start a dream group where we studied dreams along the lines of Jung's psychology. And we went to Zurich and studied at the Jung Institute in Switzerland, and got to know Jung, and Sally wrote a fine book called Jung and Tarot, which tells a great deal about Jung's psychology. So we had those interests that were all a part of our life here in Palm Springs, and it all seemed to go together.
A lot of other people in Palm Springs shared these interests with you, didn't they?
That's true. That's very true, yes.
Nick, how do you feel about it all now, looking back over the years? And how do you feel about what Palm Springs has become? Are you pleased with it, or do you wish it had been a little different? Is there too much or too little? What do you think of it?
I think Palm Springs is really great. It's it has carried on that kind of tradition of trying to be excellent and have a kind of a human refinement about it that really is part of the dignity of being a person, and knowing something about yourself, and this means knowing your community and being a part of it, and striving to help its development and your development together in meaningful ways. And I think that Palm Springs has largely fulfilled those dreams, if they were, or ambitions, or whatever they were, for many people. Many of the people I have mentioned and have known here, I think deserve credit in the stream of credits for the development of Palm Springs.
All that it's become. Well, they still have your sign ordinance.
Yeah,
and a very tough one.
Yes, and we have zoning and the land use ordinance and controls, and sometimes we think they're too tough and too difficult, and we have problems with them. But if we didn't have that, we could have been like some other desert communities that I won't name, in other states even. And thank God that we're Palm Springs.
I think that's true. Nick, you lost Sally not too long ago, and I know how difficult that was, but I know you too, and I know that you're the kind of person who looks down the road. You love and appreciate and respect the past, but you like to look ahead too. What are your interests now? What are you most involved in?
I think that I'm involved really and concerned about what is happening to our planet, the way that we are allowing our planet to run down the road toward self-destruction, and it isn't only the threat of nuclear destruction, which I think is a very terrible and powerful threat, but perhaps even more powerful and more terrible and more immediate even perhaps is this destruction of the ozone layer and by the release of a generation of many gases here on the planet, and also the burning of too much of our fossil fuels too fast, which is creating the greenhouse effect, and which is opening up the stratosphere to the effects of the actinic rays from the sun, the ultraviolet radiation, sun's radiation, which could destroy life here on the planet and destroy the land, destroy the planet itself, because that can melt the polar ice caps and raise the level of the oceans. And there's evidence that this is happening right this minute, right before our very eyes. It's going on, and there's this big opening over the Antarctic, over that continent at the pole, the South Pole, which is all of the carbon dioxide that is being generated by the burning of the fossil fuels is causing this. And
I'll bet in your spare time you're finding something to do about all this.
I would do everything I can about it. Now, I am in correspondence with a British scientist who is one of the leading minds on this subject in this field, and I have visited him at his laboratory in England recently, and I'm in correspondence with him, and I feel that I don't know what we have to do is to somehow stop burning our fossil fuels, our oil and gas and coal at such a fast pace, and we've got to slow it down. We've got to stop it if we can. But who's going to be able to do that?
Well, maybe you'll find a way.
And which is going to destroy us first, that or nuclear fission?
There's one question I have to ask you. Last night we had a pretty potent earthquake, and I think you thought it was a lot of fun, but still it was a number 6 on the Richter scale. And I wondered if it made you think of any other major earthquakes during the years you've been here.
Well, I was here in '33 when we had the earthquake over at Long Beach, which was a pretty heavy earthquake and felt throughout Southern California, including Palm Springs, and I felt it right here in my backyard. I was out there in the yard, and a series of waves went through the ground under me, just like that. Didn't throw me over, but and didn't frighten me very much. I thought this must be what an earthquake is like. And of course that turned out to have been quite a quake, the Long Beach quake, and there was some damage in Palm Springs. I don't know how much. And then there were later earthquakes in which there was local damage, and earthquakes down the valley, and up in the mountains and all around the place.
You've seen your share of floods in 1938 and again in 1969. I know that was a big one. And the earthquakes and other things, but you weathered them all.
If you can call a flood anything a flood that didn't that came after '38. 38 was such it was a flood of such magnitude that I consider the 48 or whatever since then to be sort of mountain storms.
Culver Nichols, since your birth in 1905, you've seen a lot, and thank you for sharing your experiences here in Palm Springs with us and telling us things that I think a lot of our viewers didn't know about what happened in those days. It's been nice talking with you.
It's been a pleasure, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Culver Nichols. I'm Bill Hesson for Prickly Pears, Palm Springs Historical Portraits. Our date again is July the 8th, 1986. Thank you for being with us.